Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time, John. Welcome in Salesforce Epics Hour. And today we are going to talk about how to automating the complex business process with the Agentforce. And we have a special speaker with us, Mohit Srivastava. Let me hand over him for his presentation and the session.
All
Mohit.
right. Thank you, Amit. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining this session. My name is Mohit. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce, and today I'm going to present on how you can use Agentforce to automate some of your complex business processes. So let's get started. Now, because I work for Salesforce, I'll have to put this. Um, there are features that I might speak which are currently not in the product, but they are supposed to land sometime in the future. But please make all your purchasing decisions based on the features that are currently available in the product. With that out of our way, we are really moving on here. Now, feel free to use your chat for all your questions. How many of you have played with Agentforce, built something with Agentforce, either through Trailhead or just as a part of one of our events or workshop. If you have built anything with Agentforce, feel free to share. Um, so one of the primary goal for this session for me is I'm going to show you how you can use Agentforce as automation tool. Now I know a lot of you have used other automation tools that we have, like for example, flows, Apex, writing Apex triggers, for example. So we've been all been using those tools. Agentforce is a great addition, and in my opinion, there are a lot of processes that today, can benefit out of Agentforce, and we'll take a look at that. So when I say this, right, Agentforce can simplify complex business processes. The first question that people ask is, okay, what are some of those business processes that we should look for in our organization to use Agentforce? And my initial response to them is, look, any business process can be automated using Agentforce, but there are few things that you definitely, like, Agentforce is the ideal solution. Like, those requirements cannot be met by other automation tools. If you try to do them with other automation tools, like for example triggers or Apex, you will find that um, just those tools are not enough. You need these large language model capability and the reasoning of Atlas engine that comes with Agentforce for those complex processes. So what are those complex processes? Complex decision making. So this is one of the, I would say, critical requirement that Agentforce can be deployed for, and it will definitely help. Like for example, processes that require judgment, which requires understanding language. Like in this case, for example, it could be English, right? So let's say there is some business processes that you want, and I'll show you an example of that. That you want human-like judgment. Like for example, let's say there is a case description that is coming up from your customer, and you want to find out whether that description does not have any abuse or anything that requires like manual intervention, um, things like that requires understanding, right? That requires reading those unstructured data, getting the semantics or the meaning out of that data, and then doing the decisioning based on that aspect, right? So that those type of examples are complex decision making processes, and I think Agentforce is really ideal for that because we can use the Atlas reasoning engine to do that. The other aspect that I see is processes that become difficult to maintain due to complex set of rules. You all have been using Salesforce and building rules with your flows or Apex. Now, as these things get really complex, like it has a bunch of, lot of if else statements, let's say, and then you keep on adding these processes on top of each other. It's grown so complex that now modifying them is expensive. They are prone to mistakes if you modify them, because they need to be like really like very well tested, because there are so many other scenarios that come into picture. This is where you can get benefit from Agentforce, because what you could do is identify some of these very complex processes, and instead of using pure logic, like you instead of using your own programming there, you could use the reasoning that comes with the Agentforce. So you could just pass the data in, have the atlas reason through your actions, and let agent decide what actions to take based on the descriptions that you give to the actions. We will take an example, and that should make it much more easier for you all to follow. And then last point, and this is very true, and one of those things where I see Agentforce as really fit, is if you have heavy reliance on unstructured data. Let's say you want to read through contracts and take some decisioning, or write some logic, agreements, anything that requires document understanding. Like let's say you have an unstructured data, like transcript or a call that's happened, and you have a call transcript, and based on that you want to do some decisioning or logic, or you want to accomplish certain business automation. That is where again Agentforce kind of fits. It's like match made in heaven for these three scenarios that I'm talking about. And really you can deploy Agentforce for any processes. But again, you have to balance, you have to look at, okay, what processes are like just fitting for Agentforce and nothing else, which is these things. And apart from these things, I also want to mention, like, sometimes you want to drive customer experiences. Like, for example, on a website, you don't want, your users to be reading through a bunch of documents. You just want them to ask, we want them to ask questions directly to your agents. Those are also well established scenarios. But here I want to focus only on the B2B aspect of it, basically. That is how Agentforce can simplify some of these business processes for B2B use cases, specifically for processes that are already there within your Salesforce. Like you might have a lot of processes within Salesforce. Some processes from there have become so difficult that they can, really get benefit out of this Agentforce. Okay. Um, so let's look at a demo that I want to show, and then let's understand like how I've built this Agentforce out of this automation, like how I'm replacing certain pieces of the logic, using Agentforce and driving automation that way. So let's move on to the demo here. Um, so let me close this. See. Okay, so here, if you can all see my screen, right? Today, what we're gonna do is, first thing we're gonna do is activate a trigger, because that's where I want to start. So let me active this trigger, turn this trigger active, deploy this source, um, and then walk you through this code, basically. Why is it saying unchanged? Oh, I'll figure it out. Why is it saying unchanged? Let's see. Hmm, interesting. Anyways, let's look at that trigger, and let's walk through the trigger first. And this is the, a common example of triggers that you might already have in the system. So this is a trigger on case object. We go to the case, and then we go to the triggers. Let's see. This is the case trigger that I have. Okay, this is an active state. So let's trace through this trigger, right? Now, what you could do is like tracing, when you're tracing code, right? There's a lot of code. A lot of you would have already had, code in your system, right? Which looks almost like this. Sometimes even more complex. If it's if it's matured, or probably they have some architecture, trigger framework or something to go along with it. Uh, but then you have all the logic within this trigger, right? And first thing you as a developer do is like basically understand all the logic that are there, right? Now, if you're using one of these agentic IDs, like the one that I use, like Cursor, what you could do is you could just, and this is a tip, by the way, it's not part of the thing, right? But I want to give you a tip. If you're using Klein or Cursor or any of these agentic tools, what you could do is you could simply ask for, can you create a flow chart for the logic? There are a lot of tools that actually does this, but I use Cursor, and Cursor can actually create a flow chart. It will take some time, but it'll create the flow chart. Um, but what I want to show you is really what is happening in this trigger. So if you look at this trigger, right, what it is doing is, first of all, this is a before insert and a before update trigger. So what it's going to do is, now let this actually keep happening. Oh, there you go. It created the diagram here. And this is so useful actually if you want to uncover what's happening within your org using this chart. Um, Try to use some of the AI to actually assist you in like figuring out what is happening. And you see, this is the flow chart it drew out of all the logic that exists in my org, right? And if we can quickly go through this logic, but really what's happening in my code here is, I since I wrote the code, I'm pretty familiar with it, but I could have used that flow chart, downloaded it, and shown you. But really, all I'm doing here is when some of these parameters are changing, like customer tier or risk score or refund amount. Um, so when one of these things are changing, I'm processing the refund cases. Basically, there's a complex set of logic here, which is first I'm getting the prior refund counts, making sure how many refund counts the customer has asked before issuing like these refund, detecting if there are already any open refunds for the customer. And then based on those two things, I have different rules here. Like for example, if there are duplicate open request, I say, it requires a need review because there is duplicate request. If there is a refund amount that is greater than the escalation limit, I'm saying, change the status of the case to escalated because it needs to be escalated. If it is a customer tier of gold and the refund amount is within that gold limit that we have, I think I set it as $200 or something. Then you change the status of the case to auto approved. And if the refund amount is within that limit and the risk scores are less, you also auto approve them. Otherwise, default by default, it's need review, right? So this is the thing. And also there's something called red flag. So you see how this is actually done. So in the red flag, if the case description has something like, some of these terms like fraud, chargeback, legal, attorney, lawsuit, something like that, then even that is considered in the decision making. So we go here. If any of these considered, then it is considered as a red flag. And if it has a red flag, then we, even if the customer is gold customer, we don't auto approve them. Basically it shouldn't contain any red flag, even for the gold customer too. So a lot of rules like this baked into the system. And this is how you build triggers, basically. There's no problem with this approach, except as you can see, there are a couple of things that I want you to pay attention to is, imagine this logic going like, keep growing, right? This logic, this is very simple logic, but in your production scenarios, those who have worked on real projects, these things grow. And also there are other objects that come into picture. When the case is inserting, maybe you want to create a task, maybe you have a trigger on a task, um, like that, right? So it basically cascades down. All your logic is convoluted. And this is why it becomes more complex now, because you have to maintain this. Somebody needs to be like looking at all these code, should be aware of all the processes that are happening. Not intuitive, but as a developer you can definitely do this, right? And then, but for a business user this is not great. um, And also these things are pretty hard coded here, as you can see. These things might change in the future. Every time you have to come back and change. Also, there is no semantics. There might be other words. If the language requirements comes in, then you have to consider that. So things like that. As you can see, it becomes really complex as these triggers grow to maintain. And that is the problem that we are actually trying to approach or solve. Now, when you write these triggers, one way you actually make sure that this thing works is by writing test code. So you see, I've written test code for all these trigger scenarios that I could think of. Um, and basically, you run through all these test cases. So if I go to the testing here, I run through all the test cases. Let me close these. So this is that test handler case. I just run through all the tests, make sure that every part of the logic is actually working. So as you can see, it's passed. All the tests have kind of passed um, here. So you can see it's all passed. And this is how you build regular automation, right? But as I said, the challenges are when these things keep growing and when you have more requirements and you have more objects and everything starts interfering with each other. Then you see there is a lot of intelligence that is required to maintain all these code examples and then understand the processes that it's trying to solve. That's the world that we live in currently, the current state, right? So now let's take a step forward and think about Agentforce. Okay. So what Agentforce does is instead of like monolithic, like writing everything in like this one block, right? Now you could argue that I could further simplify this logic, put it in another class, reduce, cyclomatic complexity of the code, etc. But still, it is very non-intuitive for business users, right? I mean, one way is to write flows, but again, flows also suffer from the same problem. The moment you have more branching, more strategies in place, the more logic in place, more processes in place, this analyzing this per object becomes a huge, huge challenge. And that is where AI is kind of helping because one of the things that AI has is it can reason. So AI can actually reason across your code, and it can come up with a plan. And it can accomplish all of these, by if you provide actions, it can orchestrate these actions. So let me show you that again with an example. So again, this trigger is working as I showed you. So what I'm gonna do here is really deactivate this trigger now because we'll change it. We'll move away from the trigger approach for a sec and move into the Agentforce world. Okay, so I changed it. Should reflect here too. Okay, this is inactive now, right? None of our tests should actually um, none of our tests should actually pass now because of course, it's basically there you go. It will fail, right? Or the tests actually some of them passed because might be relevant, but mostly it failed, and that is expected because um, it's not working. We deactivated, right? So how do we move towards Agentforce? So that's why I want to show you now Agentforce. Let's move on to Agentforce here. So now with Agentforce, what you get is a bunch of employee agents. Like you can build as many as, I'm pretty sure there is some limit here, but you can definitely build these employee agents, which can exist in Slack, they can exist in employee experience, like within your Salesforce app. Of course, you can build customer specific agents, etc. But let's look at this Agentforce employee agent. So this is something that is available for you. Once you add the Agentforce employee agent add-on, and there are certain additions now that you can use these Agentforce employee agent. Um, so I have created an employee agent called refund issue agent. And really, what I've done is there are uh, so the way Agentforce works is you have to create topics. Topics are nothing but jobs to be done. So if I had multiple jobs that I wanted my agent to do for this specific ask, I would have created multiple. But just for this use case, it's pretty simple. I just want to use the same process that we have, right, for the same triggers that you saw. um, I have I want to automate that process using Agent Force. So what I did here is I created a topic called case refund status update, and classification descriptions are important because this is how the agent basically understands which topics to pick. And this is the first thing that happens when the agent runs, like picking up the topic. We'll see that in the planner here. But really, having a classification description makes it easy for the agent to understand what topics needs to be invoked based on the queries that are there. And then the scope, this limits or guardrails the agent to be scoped. And then we have some instructions here. So the instructions are pretty simple. What I'm saying here is how I want my UI behavior, right? In this case, always ask for case number or the contact name and the asset number if provided. This is how I'm driving the UI logic here. And then what I want, right? Like for example, for detecting abuse, pass in these case descriptions because that's the action that I have. And then my logic of orchestration is natural language now. So all I'm saying is, see, if the employee asks whether the customer is eligible for refund, use the provider details to first do the query, so get all these field information, then do this action called get customer context, then do this action, and then finally do this action. And then for the last action, the inputs come from the previous action. You see? So simple natural language instructions. And then the crux of it is, look, we are not going to get away from all the coding. Like you cannot take everything that is there in that Apex class and just write instructions. I've seen developers doing that, taking everything and writing instructions. Agents are not going to work that way because non-determined. The more instructions that you have, the agent finds it hard to navigate, and more importantly, what happens if the agent doesn't follow an instruction? Like there is these agents, right, are working based on natural language understanding, and there is a high probability that they don't understand your business scenario even if you explain them clearly, because that's not part of the training data for these agents, right? So really that is why it's important to move the deterministic logic, which you want to be like really deterministic, into actions. And that's why we have actions here. So actions are basically for a topic, what jobs or the actions you want your agents to accomplish. So you can see here, we need the ability for the agent to query records. We need the ability to update records. So these are standard actions that come out of, we provide. But then I've also written some custom actions. So let's look at some custom actions. Like for example, in this case, gather customer refund context. So what is that? So if I go to this code base here, if you look at gather customer context, it's same logic that we had in the trigger now moved to a specific action. So instead of like that one monolithic chain of events that I had, right, or actions that I have, now I'm strategically dividing or deciding, okay, I need to have these two or these three actions out of that monolithic chain. So now you have broken that full monolithic code into simplified actions that have single responsibilities based on your business logic. Now, in my case, right, and like figuring it out, like which actions do you need is a skill that comes, and you have to consider a lot of factor into it. I did a session on best practices for writing Agentforce actions in Apex. That's there on our developers YouTube channel. You can go there and understand some of the best practices. But really, for this use case of the example, I needed this customer context action. And really, all this action is doing is the same thing that my code does, but not everything. Like a couple of things I wanted it to do. So one of the things I wanted it to do was find that duplicate if there are duplicate cases for the refund that are pending for the customer. And also, I wanted to find if there are any other cases, open cases for that specific asset ID. So these two logic are there here. Rest of it is all boilerplate code because for the agent to make it understand, we need to have uh, inputs. So if we look at one of these actions, like for example, get customer um, context action. And just to show you how you create actions, right? Really, all you do is to create an action is you need to write an apex or a flow. And then just give me a sec. Then all you do is let me deactivate it so it's easier for us to see through. So basically, the way you do is you say create action. Here, you can bring in any of these actions basically to your agent. Um, in my case, it's an apex action. So I can say invocable methods and then bring any of these. Like in my case, it was this one, gather customer context. Now it's not going to create because I already have the actions created for me. But really important thing here is to provide all the instructions here because this becomes input to the reasoning engine. So you have to tell what are these inputs in natural language, and then you have to tell what are these outputs in natural language, right? So that's how we create action. So we have that action that I was showing you, get customer refund context action. If you look at here, I'm saying, hey, retrieve refund context information for customer, including refund contacts and duplicate cases, except case ID. And then here, what you're gonna do is you provide the natural language instructions, and then you get the output. Right, you're getting the prior refund count, you're getting if there are any duplicate cases. Now, when you're chaining actions, you need to feed this data back. Like for example, I have this action now. So once this action happens, get customer refund contacts, I want it to decide the refund status, which is another action. But if you look at the input for that action, you will see that one of the inputs is coming from this variable called duplicate cases. And how is that duplicate cases being populated, right? Again, that is coming from variables. So if you go to the context here, you can create variables. Like I've created variables for the prior refund counts, duplicate cases. Creation of variables are pretty simple. You just say new variable and set the data type and say what do you want. So this becomes a variable that this whole conversation can hold and all the actions can reference into it. Think of it like a state holding machine, right? It's a state that holds all the information. So here I'm holding these two states so I can pass into another action. And you can even, I don't have the filters, but if you want more determinism, you can add the filters too into this agent. But if you look at what I'm doing really is another action here called um, decide refund status, which is again an Apex action. And again, if I show you the code for that, let me show you the code for that. So here, right, very interesting, right? I decided to use Apex to do certain pieces of the logic because I want this to be really deterministic. Like I could have easily converted this into natural language too, but for me, this business logic is something that is like I cannot mess with it. Like this has to work 100% times, right? And that is where it shouldn't be non-deterministic. It's a deterministic logic. So that's why I have Apex for it. And this is how you're going to design your agents. It's like you're going to use natural language instruction to orchestrate these actions and decide which actions are deterministic and very critical for your business, and then which actions are something that large language model should perform. So in this case, again, it's the same logic that you have seen in the trigger, but what I've done is basically just created it as another invocable method. So this becomes like an action that is available to us. And then finally, you saw that red flag thing, right? Which is detection of the abused language in this case. Now, look how I'm solving this. I'm using prompt builder to solve this. So in my trigger example, you would have seen I was like hard coding some words and checking, right? That that is where I think the large language models actually can help you because they can understand. So I have a simple prompt which says, hey, you're a prompt expert reviewer, and from the case description identify if the customer is abusing or using some abused languages, right? And here is the case description, and this is what I want you to be return as a final output. And then, of course, you can test these things too. Like you can say, let's test this out. So for example, if I give a case, let's say the first case here, 001. Let me deactivate so we can, oh, sorry. Let's do this one, preview this. Let's preview this. So you can see that, okay, this case, maybe this case doesn't have the description. That's why it's, one sec. Let me find out a case that has a description. It's well-defined description here. Let's go back. Oh, this one. Okay, let's put this one. So let's go back to the, okay, let's add this. So this is how you build your non-deterministic logic. Basically, you will provide, and you see it doesn't have any red flag because the description were only this much. There were delivery item missing. So please issue refund. There was no abuse here. So it returned a response. So this is a non-deterministic action. So now if you look at Agentforce and the agent that I have all these actions given with their descriptions, and then I'm using topics to like really orchestrate it, right? Really keeping it simple. Like if you look at my whole instruction set, and this is where I think one of the best practices is to reduce these number of instructions actually, and also don't make it very complex, right? If you have a complex logic, it actually goes within the prompt builder, complex non-deterministic logic, deterministic logic into your actions, and your instruction should only do uh, you know, I would say a little bit of logic, but for most part of it, it should really help agent understand how to use these actions and orchestrate them. So let me show you how this actually works now. So, what I could do is I can say, hey, fine, tell me if John Amos is eligible for a refund, right? So this will be what your users are going to be doing. It's going to come back and say, can you please provide the asset number associated with it or the case number, right? So it really went here and looked at all the instruction, right? And you can say, hey, let me provide you a case number. You can provide an asset number or a case number. You should ideally have asked, case number 2. And again, if it's not doing what you want, you tweak your prompts. You come back and tweak your instructions. A case number, let's see. Number to help you. So let's provide a case number here. So now again, it's gonna use those reasoning engine, Atlas reasoning engine, orchestrate these actions for you. It's working through that case now. So you see, now it's saying, hey, based on whatever details that you have, the case needs to be reviewed, and the case reason is manual review required. So it went through all the logic to find the eligibility, and then this is what it came up with, right? Let's do this, and you can, confirm to update. Like update actions usually require, so you see it's updated. The status is now updated, basically. You see there's no reason here, but if we update it, it's updated, right? Now you might ask me like, hey, this is good, like, conversational interface, right? But triggers used to automate this whole thing. Like I don't have to worry about, users sort of asking me, or, basically this was all automated on its own, right? um, yes, so if you need automation, right, you can take this Agentforce that you have built, right? This is the Agentforce that you have built that first of all exists for all the users who want to use conversationally and interact with it. And again, based on the user query, it can orchestrate the actions like we saw. But let's say you want to automate this, right? Let's activate this. So let's say you want to automate this whole thing. And just like triggers, right, where you don't have to worry about it and let basically agent take care of all the logic, and the record here, the database drive the logic, just like how um, you know triggers were doing. Because in the triggers case, there was no conversation. It was like, I just change the records here and there, and then the logic kicks in and tells me the or updates the fields, right? And a lot of times you need that, right? And that is why you can now bring those agentic automations that you have done directly into your automation tool. So in this case, update refund case status, right? So if you look at here, so this is a simple flow. Let me activate this. This is a simple flow that I create. Now this could be triggers too. You can completely create a trigger, but for me, like, flows are easier when I'm working with Agentforce. So really a simple flow here. Same thing, a case when the record is created or edited. I have all these criterias. But most importantly, what I'm doing here is invoking the same agent. So here, instead of writing all that logic or the Apex, right, it's all part of that Agentforce actions now. And all I'm saying is, can you tell me if the case with the case number eligible for refund? So I put my prompt in directly here, and then I continue the conversation. Like, I know that it was asking for updation. I want to further automate that, so I provide, with the same session ID here, right, with the same session ID input. So you see, I passed the session ID from this action. So this action gave a session ID here, and the agent responds. So I passed that session ID, so the context is maintained between the sessions. So I'm going to say, hey, update the status. Yes, please update the status and the case reason as applicable. So now that this is active, let me show you how it actually works. Only difference is, because it uses the Atlas reasoning engine, it's not going to be like synchronous, but it's like near real time synchronous action that's going to happen. So let me show you what happens, right? So let's see. Get rid of this, close all these tabs. So what I'm going to do here is to show you how that thing works. Let's actually go and let's go back to time based. Okay, so one of the things is we could monitor that process, and only way you monitor is time-based automations, because this is a time-based action that will happen. So let's imagine that, say none here. Let's revert the data here, and status can be this, right? Save this. Hopefully there are no automations that are triggering. There you go, nothing triggered. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is, let's say I change the customer tier to gold, right? And now I want that same process automation to kick in now. So the same process automation would kick in. So you see, there is a process that kicked in now. That's same Agentforce action. And now what's going to happen is, we should see if this action succeeds, we should see the status and the refund being changed. Let's see. It's still pending in the queue. So it just takes, a moment. It depends. Really small delay, I would say, like a fraction of a second, probably, or maybe a minute. So now it's done. So now you can see when I am refreshing it, it has to be asynchronous, remember. So it says, see the case reason, gold tier courtesy refund, and the status was auto approved. And this logic is driven by this agent, right? And if you look at how we've like simplified it, right, all that agent is doing is being invocable simply using that flow that we just saw. But instead of, like, that flow is no more like too complex, because agent is doing all the action orchestration for us, and we don't hard code that orchestration. Instead, where is it? This one, right? So instead, if you look at, this might be like more fun to watch, right? It's like, what we are doing here is just writing real natural language, um, and the process is getting orchestrated by these natural language, right? Um, So this is what I just wanted to show. I mean, and just looking at, comparing the solutioning, right? Both of these approaches, I don't say one is bad versus one is other, but to me, right, if you are like writing a lot of logic, without separation within your triggers, it becomes complex at some point. It will become harder to maintain. Specifically, if you have a lot of database triggers going around, this becomes really complex actually. Once you have, like, in my example, I mean, honestly, there's not a lot of complexity. It's still digestible because we have a trigger on a case and that's it. But imagine you had a trigger on a case and then a trigger on a task, and then task is creating some kind of another trigger, or probably the case is doing some logic on contact, and again the contact is doing some logic on account. You see all these triggers firing, and you have to manage all these triggers, now, with different flags and different code and workarounds, different patterns. Now people are like, we can come up with trigger frameworks or patterns. That makes sense. Like, you have trigger frameworks or patterns, but still, like, there is that complexity of having to manage all these things. And that is where I like Agentforce, because in Agentforce, all you're doing is, if you go back to our agent, right? What you're doing in Agentforce is simplifying, right? So really, you figure out what you want your jobs to be done, you create agents, and then you create topics based on the jobs to be done. In my case, it is single one topic. Again, based on the complexity, you might have, 3 or 5 topics. I generally recommend per agent do not have more than 10 topics. Like, there are best practices guide where you can go and see, but don't have much topics. You'll have, if you have 5 6 sweet spot, then for per topic, again, not more than 10 actions, right? You have, in this case, we had 7 actions, 8 10 actions, sweet spot 10 to 15 actions. Reduce it. Reduce the number of actions. If the actions are growing, that means you need more topics actually. And then you orchestrate using natural language, and really what becomes very easy for you to maintain, because now you know that, this is the agent that is doing this specific thing. This is the orchestration that you want the agent to do, and these are specific set of actions. So in future, if you need to add something, you just go and add an action, probably, to this set of agentic actions, right? And this is an alternate way, basically, in my opinion, but very powerful way to architect your application. Specifically, just going back to these slides, right? When you have these requirements, when you have complex decision making, when you have difficulty maintaining these hard coded rules, and then you have heavy reliance on these unstructured data, you might have documents and things like that, and you want to drive automation based on that. Apex cannot do it because Apex cannot parse the document and read through all those things. It's too much, and you can write other programs like in Python or Java and host it somewhere. But again, they are not truly intelligent. They are like fixed hard coded rules. Sometimes you need hard coded rules, you can go for them, but most of the times the the agent force reasoning engine should be able to help you much more easier by just writing natural language instructions and guiding it with prompt engineering, basically. And you see how I combined both the processes, right? Amit, I would like to take some questions before I move on, actually. It's been silent here. So,
Yep, please.
yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to ask.
So there
Uh,
is a question, maintenance is very easy through this. Is the order of execution affected in any way with the agent force come in the picture?
This is a very good question, right? Very, very good question, actually. And thanks for asking that question, right? So, look, in the trigger scenario, right? Like, that order of execution, like controlling that is almost, I would say, like nearly impossible. Okay, because um, again, you can do it through trigger handler framework. You can control, but then there is manage packages that you bring in, so you don't know when this code is entering the manage package, exiting these packages. It's a nightmare, actually, honestly. In my opinion, I have built more apps, actually, more triggers, than a lot of you here in the call, because I have been working with Salesforce technology for 13 14 years. I'm sure Amit will admit to it. Like, you would have built a lot of these triggers, right? The thing is, like, you have to manage it, and that's a hard task. Actually, it becomes a task in itself. Look what happens with Agentforce. So when you go to Agentforce, right, the order of execution is completely controllable. Why? Because A, you are getting away from the database logic, right? The logic, the database logic is getting simplified now. There's no lot of database like inserts, updates, all those are getting simplified, right? Now, if you keep your users only on the agent experience, probably even that logic will go away, in my opinion, like the actual trigger, um, like actual database layer logic, that will go away. But there will be times where you need that database logic, so let's assume, but at least some part of it will go away, right? And then it is controllable because now you know the actions that are happening, and that order of execution, like in this case I wanted to control the order of execution, right? There are multiple ways you can control it. One, by creating what I call it as composite actions. That means, if you want certain actions to do it in a certain way, you can combine, like you can combine these two within the code itself. Like you can have one invocable class instead of having these two, right? It's up to you. Like if you want more control, combine it. If you want less control, keep it loose, like here. And then, based on that, like in this case, I wanted it to run in a specific sequence. Like, for example, if the employee asks whether the customer is eligible for refund, I want it to run the query action first. And then I want it to run the customer context action. Then I want to run this one. And then last, I want to run that decide action, right? And for the decide run action, it requires input from these other three actions. So I'm mentioning that. So this orchestration is getting done by this natural language instruction. So as long as you are flexible, as long as you can test. Now, let's take other questions. I want to move one aspect I did not show, and I'll show that now.
The next question, for the data security and visibility setting, anyway, can Agentforce be used here?
Yeah, so data visibility is driven by the user's access. Like if the user didn't have access, one of these action would have like failed basically. And you would have to handle these within the action and say, if this is the error, catch the error and return, right? If one of the things goes wrong, you will see it will not work. It's the same. The security principle is, one second, let me add the charging, otherwise this will die off. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So really, yeah, now it's charging. Thank God. So yeah. So the idea here, Amit, is that the security is same. Okay, it's like if you don't give access to a field or something, if you look at how I'm coded this, right, with sharing class, any any updates, in this case, no updates are happening, but I can show through the query. So if you look at trigger, I kind of kept it loose, right? But if you look at my classes, like actual classes, if you look at one of these queries, okay, this one doesn't have any query. You see, one of these action doesn't have any query. And then this action though might have the query. Let's see. So you see, run it in user mode. So it runs as that user, right? Um, yeah, so you see all the queries are running in user mode. So the security is still like kept intact. There's no like security or anything. Like it's the same security model you're used to with Salesforce. We have an ASA. I'll take that question later, actually, the ASA question. This talk I did not like make it for the ASA. It's more for employee agent, because employee agents are something that in some of the licenses and edition you get it for unlimited conversations basically, and that is where this can be a really good tool to use as an automation. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to show you is, just because we have written this code and orchestrated it doesn't mean that um, we shouldn't test it, right? So again, test classes, as you can see, I have a comprehensive test class for this specific class. So everything needs to be unit tested, right? Just like normal Apex, like all your invocable methods should be unit tested. But the fun part that I wanted to show you was testing center. So if you go to the testing, now if you look at the testing, I have the test cases here. Let's run the test cases here, and you can run it from your IDE, or you can run it from the Agentforce testing center here. So if you go to the testing center, right? So in the testing center, what you do is you really basically, so this test is completed. It's all passed basically. But really, you provide an utterance, and you say for this specific utterance, I'm expecting this topic. And then you compare the actual topic. And then you say for this utterance, I'm expecting these actions to be triggered. And then you compare with actual actions. And then you say this is the response that I'm expecting. And the response should actually match these two. um, and that's how you create variations of different utterances, because the way you ask this question can be like, changed. The customer can ask this in a 10 different ways. So you want to really see with your utterance how exactly your system is performing. It could run it here too, like for example, I can run this test here. So you see it kicked the job and it's running the test cases now. So now it's running the test cases, which I would like you to show. Again, same question that I put in the agent, right? Can you check if the case number qualifies for a refund? And actually testing that scenario, testing with a contact that doesn't have this asset. Um, yeah, so it's running. So you see one of the tests has some issue, but you can see what's happening here. Let me see. So here you see, so here the topic passed. You see this, the outcome, right? uh yeah, so the expected, so I need to fix this actually, because I think the expected needs to change to this actually. It's actually correct, it's not failed. But you see we also have metrics here, like it's saying it's concise, right? So you can evaluate based on certain metrics here, right? um so that is how you test these things. You test, just like how you're testing a software, right? You make sure that the actual topics are getting triggered, you make sure the actions are getting triggered, and you make sure that your outcome is there, right? In this case, you see it has a metrics of conciseness of zero point 0.8, while our threshold is zero point 0.6. So you evaluate the non-deterministic logic too. So these are like, some of these is non-determinism, and you evaluate through the testing center. So this is how you build and evaluate your agentic systems. So again, both are different approaches, right? Writing triggers. Triggers are very good, if you have deterministic logic. But remember that they are going to get complex as the requirements get complex. There is no modularity. It's up to the developer and the admin, the architect to come up with frameworks. Frameworks are good, but still it doesn't eliminate the complexity, right? That is why Agentforce can be a tool, because what it could do is it can take some of these processes which are like, which could go non-determinism, um, or even determinism process. You can bundle them together and let AI do the orchestration for you, so you don't have to worry about the order of operations, etc. Also, other thing to note is, when you are running this trigger, right, you are bounded by the CPU limits, right? The CPU limits, right? So here, for example, in this process, right, like the refund trigger handler, right? In this process, right, all these processes that you have, like, we had like 3 or 4 processes here, right? All these needs to execute within 10 seconds. All these needs to execute within 10 seconds. Okay, 10 seconds is the limit, CPU limit that you get. You need to execute this within 10 seconds. What happens with Agentforce, though, surprisingly, is every one of these actions gets 10 seconds for you. Every one of these gets 10 seconds. So you see, you will probably not hit CPU limits in this approach, because again, you get 10 seconds to just do customer refund context information. You get 10 seconds just to decide the refund status. Instead of like all these actions having to fit within the 10 seconds limit, you get 10 seconds for every action execution, right? Because it is one by one sequential calling, and all of them executes in its own thread. So that is another advantage that you get. uh, can I get the session recording? Yes, we'll share the session recording. So moving on here, and I'll take some more questions after this, right? So moving on. Um, so let's summarize, right? So traditional workflows, the challenge with them is it becomes hard to maintain, as the logic between different automation can interfere easily, right? Um, and then it requires developers and documentation to uncover the processes and the system, lot more than what Agentforce would do. And junior developers can find it harder to follow principles of single responsibility, right? Now if you give this to a junior developer, like for example writing code, again they'll write all the code within like one specific class, and then it becomes really difficult to handle. With agentic workflow built with Agentforce, right, conversational interface, so the business logic stays close to that user interface that the user is interacting. Non-technical users can clearly understand the system, right? Like for example, if a business analyst were to look at that whole thing, they'll probably understand it much better. I mean, of course, they don't have the skill set to look at all your code and stuff, right? Even with the flows, it might be harder, but here it becomes really easy to understand because it's all natural language. And then automatically it forces people to think, to design in a single responsibility principle for these actions. Other things is again, traditional workflows require developers to agree upon architecture. In this case, the system has clear separation based on the jobs to be done, what jobs you want your agents to accomplish, right? There is a separation that has happened at the system level itself, right? Not at the code level here. And then traditional workflows cannot be used if the process requires reading unstructured data, for example. Rule-based system definitely fail. AI can reason over that unstructured data. And then again, as the logic grows, the system becomes hard to maintain in case of traditional workflows. Here, the complex logic is automatically broken into small set of actions. And then you're using natural language and the AI to orchestrate and write the orchestration. So there are some considerations too, right? Again, critical business processes should be written as deterministic process. You saw it's not eliminating code 100%, right? This is the misconception people have with Agentforce, like eliminate everything. No, your processes that are there in your business, they still need to be written as deterministic processes, okay? It's just that the way they are getting orchestrated, it's much more simplified through Agentforce. Again, if you need more determinism, you need filters and variables. And then test all deterministic logic. Again, testing doesn't go away. In fact, more testing is required here. You have to test both deterministic and non-deterministic logic, right? And then we have given evals now with testing. Like you saw that concise metrics, right? You can test the latency if you want. You can test other metrics there. If you create a testing, basically a testing center test, it asks for three matrices that we have. We might add more in the future, but conciseness, completeness, and the other metrics that we have is latency. So you can test for all those for the agent. The other things I would say is, again, you need to still understand the best practices of Agentforce. Again, just like triggers, if you use a lot of instructions in Agentforce, just like how you write a lot of logic in trigger, it becomes unmanageable. Same thing. If you have a lot of instructions, the agent will have problems. So keep the instructions pretty simplified, focused to a topic. And also you have to limit the number of actions and the number of number of actions you have per topic. So there are Agentforce best practices guide already. If you search for Agentforce guide, there is a best practice document that team has created, where you can go and learn about all the best practices and things to build and maintain these agentic workflows and systems. With that, right? Some more questions, we can take it. Um, Amit, if you have some more questions from our.
I guess that's it.
Okay, so that's it. Hopefully, everything was clear. And again, just to summarize, right? Like I know this was one of the things when I initially mentioned on the LinkedIn, like Agentforce is better, and then people like started commenting a lot on that post, right? I just want to say, like, look, there are tools. These all of these are Salesforce tools, right? Triggers, flows, Agentforce. Um, Use it based on the job that you want to accomplish, okay? And again, as I said, Agentforce is one. Definitely you need Agentforce if you are doing really complex applications. It definitely simplifies it. That's the crux of my talk. Okay, with that, thank you so much for joining, and I hope you will have a great weekend. And again, please share any feedback or any concerns or comments. I'm always looking to improve this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mohit, for such a great session, and thank you, everyone, for the joining. Don't forget to check our tomorrow session that is also on Agent Force, how to connect Agent Force with that WhatsApp application. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.